On the day my female alpha divorced me, she expected tears. She expected me to tremble, to ask her to stay, to hold on to whatever little mercy she was willing to leave behind. Instead, I signed the papers, smiled, and realized something that should have hit me a long time ago. I was done begging to be loved properly. For years, she had treated my silence like weakness, my patience like obedience, and my love like something she could take for granted. And maybe I let her. Maybe I spent too long trying to be easier, smaller, quieter, just to keep from losing her. But heartbreak changes you. It strips things down until all that's left is the truth. And the truth was simple. Losing her hurt, but losing myself had hurt more. So when she looked at me, waiting for me to fall apart, I didn't. I looked back at her and knew, for the first time, that walking away was the strongest thing I had ever done. Before we get into the story, thank you so much for being here and supporting my channel. I'd love to know where you're watching from, so please tell me in the comments, and also let me know what kind of story you want next. And if you'd like to support me, the best way is by commenting, liking this video, and subscribing to the channel. On the day my female alpha divorced me, she expected tears. What she got was my signature, my smile, and the quiet certainty that I would never kneel for her again. 6 months later, the city called me unstoppable. My name is Vane, and before the divorce, I was known for only one thing: being the Omega who married Aurelia Thorne. Aurelia was the kind of alpha people moved for without thinking. She was young, brilliant, frighteningly composed, and born into the kind of money that made laws feel optional. When she entered a room, conversations straightened themselves. When she looked at you, it felt like being measured by a blade. When she chose me, the city treated it like a scandal in diamonds. An Omega from a scholarship district. A Thorne-born chairwoman's future. A bond no one approved of and everyone wanted to watch fail. For a while, I believed we had beaten them. Aurelia never loved loudly. She loved with precision. She remembered the tea I drank when my heat made me nauseous. She booked the window seat for me on trains because she knew tunnels made me anxious. She kept the penthouse warmer than she liked in winter because my hands were always cold. She would pause outside conference calls just to fix the collar of my coat before I left. It was never softness with her. It was attention. Complete, unnerving attention. That was why the change took me longer to name than it should have. At first, it was only absence. A dinner moved for a meeting. A weekend canceled for the board. A late night in her study that became 3 late nights and then a habit. After that came distance. Her kisses turned brief. Her answers turned efficient. Our conversations started sounding like memos. Then came the family interference. Her mother, Aurelia Thorne, began arriving at the penthouse without warning, always smiling like she was inspecting a property she planned to renovate. And then there was Vesper Arden, female alpha, old bloodline, council daughter. Exactly the kind of woman the Thorne family had wanted for Aurelia, before Aurelia made the catastrophic mistake of loving me instead. I told myself Vesper was a ghost from Aurelia's old life. I told myself old expectations had no place in a marriage. I told myself many things, because the truth arrived slowly, and truth is easier to survive when it wears a familiar face. Before Aurelia, my life had been narrow but mine. I lived above a stationery shop, run by an elderly beta couple, who never raised the rent because I organized their receipts and fixed their printer whenever it jammed. I studied at night, worked mornings at a legal transcription firm, and spent every spare hour in my aunt's bookbindery because paper made more sense to me than people did. Paper never lied about what it was. Cheap paper wrinkled. Good paper held its shape. Ink either took or it didn't. There was honesty in materials. Then Aurelia came into my life like a sealed room suddenly opening. We met at a scholarship board reception, where I was serving as a note-taking assistant because the actual clerk had the flu and I needed extra income. She arrived late. Every woman in the room noticed. Not because she was loud, because power changes the air before it changes the sound. I was standing near the side table with a stack of folders against my chest when one of the councilwomen dropped a glass and snapped at me to fetch a towel, though I was not staff and she knew it. I had just crouched to pick up the shards when another hand reached down first. Long fingers, expensive watch. Stillness instead of panic. Aurelia looked at the councilwoman and said, "You broke it. You pick it up." No one had ever defended me that cleanly before. Not with outrage, not with pity, with certainty. I remember that more clearly than our first kiss. Maybe that should have warned me. I was always most vulnerable to women who made certainty look like safety. We did not begin with a dramatic chase. We began with conversations that stretched too long. Aurelia asked what I was studying, why I liked restoration archives more than active litigation, why I preferred train stations to airports, why my handwriting looked like something copied from a 19th century ledger. No one asked me why I was the way I was. Women usually asked what I could become for them. Aurelia asked as if the answer itself mattered. That was the beginning. Then came flowers sent not to my room, but to my aunt's shop, because I had once mentioned I hated receiving anything beautiful where other women could turn it into gossip. Then came a first date at a museum after closing hours, because she rented the West Wing for quiet. Then came her hand at the back of my neck on a rain-streaked balcony when she said, with that impossible calm, "You are the first woman I have ever wanted to know slowly." I should have run from a sentence like that. Instead, I married it. Our bond ceremony was private because Aurelia insisted, and because I had enough sense to understand that the fewer Thorne women in the room, the holier the room would remain. Junia signed as my witness. Lucienne did not attend. Neither did half the board. Aurelia said she didn't care. I believed her because in those days, she still sounded like a woman who could choose love over architecture. The first 6 months of our marriage were the closest I have ever come to living inside a secret season. We inhabited the penthouse like a weather system of two. She read in the evenings with one ankle crossed over the other, and me tucked against her side under a blanket she pretended she didn't need. I restored damaged journals at the long dining table, while she worked beside me with 2 screens of hostile numbers and somehow made concentration feel intimate. When my heat hit too hard, she cleared her schedule without telling me and sat with me for hours, silent when silence was mercy, speaking only when I started to shake. I remember once waking in the middle of a cycle, half delirious, and finding her asleep on the floor beside the bed, because she had refused to leave in case I needed water. Aurelia never said, "I am yours." That would have been too crude for her. Instead, she learned every weakness in me and guarded them like national borders. I mistook that for devotion. Maybe it was. Maybe devotion and control are twins until pressure separates them. The first real fracture came over dinner one Thursday in October. I had cooked because she said she would be home by 8, and cooking for Aurelia had become one of the few domestic rituals that still felt private enough to belong to us. By 9:30, the food had gone cold. By 10, her assistant had texted that Aurelia was caught in committee. At 11:12, Aurelia walked in with her tie loosened and the scent of someone else's cigar smoke on her coat. I was still sitting at the table, one plate eaten, one untouched. She stopped when she saw me, and for a second I saw actual regret. Then it vanished beneath exhaustion. "You should have slept," she said. I said, "You should have come." She set her bag down with more force than necessary. The board moved the debt review unexpectedly. You always say unexpectedly when it's something you choose to stay for. Her face sharpened. Iris. That tone. Warning wrapped in my name. I held her gaze anyway. It's true. She didn't yell. Aurelia never yelled. Instead, she went very still and said, "There are pressures on this company you do not understand." I should have heard it then. Not the insult, the distance. The way she had started talking as if understanding her life were a qualification I had failed to earn. I asked, "Do you want me in your life, or only around its edges?" She looked at me a long time. Then she said the sentence that haunted me for months after. "I want you safe from the middle of it." At the time, I thought she meant protection. Later, I understood she meant exclusion. The second fracture came with Lucienne. She began inviting herself into our home under the pretense of strategy dinners. I would come downstairs and find 3 female alphas around the black stone island discussing asset rotation, while Lucienne sipped wine like she owned the skyline. Sometimes Aurelia would ask me to join them, and those evenings were the worst, because it revealed just enough to make concealment feel personal. They spoke over me when the subject was governance, and directly to me when the subject was optics. Lucienne once asked whether I might consider fewer public appearances until market sentiment stabilized. I replied that if the market was threatened by my face, perhaps the market needed more therapy than the company. Aurelia nearly smiled into her glass. Lucienne did not. That night, Aurelia closed the bedroom door, crossed to me, and kissed me so thoroughly it almost erased her mother from the evening. Almost. Afterward, I asked, "Do you agree with her?" Aurelia's hand paused where it rested on my waist. "With what?" "That I should be hidden when the numbers get nervous?" She looked away first. That was answer enough. The third fracture was Vesper. At first, she existed only as a name, then as a face in shared articles, then as a woman who began appearing at fundraisers Aurelia had previously attended alone. When I finally met her properly, it was at a winter policy luncheon, where she took my hand and smiled as if tasting something expensive. "You're prettier than the papers managed," she said. I smiled back. "And you're ruder." Aurelia heard it, because later in the car she said, "You don't need to fence with her." I looked out at the blurred city and answered, "Then tell her not to touch my name like she bought it." Aurelia drove in silence for a full block before saying, "Vesper is politically useful." There are sentences a marriage does not recover from, even when no one leaves the room after hearing them. Politically useful. Not friend. Not colleague. Useful. I said, "Is that what wives are too?" The grip of her hands on the wheel tightened. "That is not what I meant." "It's what you said." She did not apologize. The omission settled between us like a stone. After that, our life became a sequence of almost conversations. She would begin to explain and stop. I would ask a question and receive half an answer. We slept in the same bed, but rarely at the same hour. When she was home, she was watchful. When she was away, she was unreachable. The paradox would have been amusing if it had not been my marriage. Then came the week before the gala. Aurelia started using a private study inside the penthouse she had never locked before. Not once in our marriage had she locked any room against me. Suddenly, that study required a code change, a biometric plate,
and her personal assistant delivering hard copy packets at midnight. I told myself it was a confidential review. I told myself not all secrecy is betrayal. Then Lucienne came over on a Wednesday afternoon, unaware I was home because my afternoon appointment had cancelled. I heard her voice from the hall before she saw me. "You have delayed this long enough," she was saying. Aurelia's reply was lower, too low to catch. Lucienne continued, "If you want to keep your seat, it must be done before Founders' Night." I should have walked in then, demanded answers, broken whatever remained breakable in daylight. Instead, I stayed frozen in the corridor, like a coward in my own house, while the rest of my life decided whether I deserved to know it. That night, Aurelia came to bed after 1. I was awake, though she thought I slept. She stood beside the bed for several seconds in the dark. I felt her hand hover over my hair and stop, then withdraw. That almost touched me more than touch would have. The next morning, while she showered and her assistant was still downstairs, I went into the study. Not for revenge, not yet, for truth.
I had seen enough of the new code entered through the reflected glass wall to memorize the sequence. Aurelia always underestimated how carefully I observed the world. The safe behind the legal shelves opened on the second try. Inside were 4 drives and 1 cream folder. I took 1 drive because fear makes thieves of women who have run out of invitations. I replaced everything else exactly as I found it. Then I sat in the library with my pulse kicking against my ribs and opened the files. Every marriage has a moment when the future changes shape. Mine happened in silence, with a black drive warming in my palm. Masked debt exposure through shell companies. Suppressed reporting on Omega certification fraud in labor branches. Draft language for strategic leadership stabilization. And then the file that made my body go cold. A succession memorandum laying out the exact rehabilitation strategy that would follow Aurelia's divorce from me and her public alignment with Vesper Arden. My name appeared throughout, never as a woman, as a liability, a narrative concern, a visibility problem, a timing variable. At the bottom of one appendix was the sentence I have never forgotten. Recommended sequence: preserve public alpha composure, execute dissolution with controlled optics, transition replacement within quarter. Recommended sequence. As if the end of my marriage were a furniture plan. I should have confronted Aurelia immediately. I didn't. Part of me wanted to know whether she would tell me on her own. That part was the ruinous one, the one still in love, the one that believed maybe she was gathering the evidence so she could burn the board instead of me, the one that wanted an explanation to arrive before the wound did. That was the hope she killed at the observatory. The night everything ended was the Thorne Foundation Winter Gala. Every year, the family filled the city's glass observatory with money, orchids, and women who knew how to smile while bleeding each other with compliments. The event mattered to the board, to the family, to the press, and therefore to Aurelia. It should have mattered to me, too. I was her wife. Instead, by the time I stepped into the observatory in silver silk, I already felt like an extra in somebody else's performance. The room glittered. The chandeliers threw soft gold across polished glass. Female alphas in dark suits stood in circles of power. Omegas in couture colors moved at their sides like inherited promises. And there, near the central platform, stood my wife. Aurelia wore black. Of course she did. She always looked like the room had chosen darkness to flatter her. Her hair was swept back. Her profile was sharp enough to cut. One hand rested at the small of Vesper Arden's back. Not casually, not by accident. Possessively. I stopped walking. For one stupid second, I thought my eyes had invented it. Then Vesper leaned closer and laughed at something Aurelia said, and my body understood before my pride did. The music kept playing, servers kept moving. No one around them looked surprised. That was the first humiliation. Not the hand, not the woman. The realization that other people knew before I did. I crossed the room anyway, because there are moments when shock becomes the only thing strong enough to hold a person upright. Aurelia saw me halfway there, her gaze fixed on me. I waited for panic. I waited for shame. I waited for her hand to leave Vesper's back, as though she had touched a flame. Instead, her face became still, prepared. That was worse than guilt. Prepared meant this had already happened in her mind. Prepared meant I was late to my own heartbreak. I stopped in front of them. Vesper's smile thinned, but she did not step back. Aurelia's hand finally dropped. The delay insulted me more than the gesture itself. Iris, Aurelia said. Just my name. No warmth, no endearment, no movement toward me. I looked at Vesper, then at Aurelia, then back at the place on Vesper's dress where my wife's hand had just been. How long? Vesper's brows lifted with almost theatrical pity. Aurelia said, Not here. The answer landed like a slap. I laughed once, low and ugly. You made it here. Nearby conversations had started to die. Good. Let them listen. Let them choke on what their beautiful families had built. Aurelia took one step closer and lowered her voice. You are upset. That sentence nearly destroyed the last of my restraint. Not because it was cruel, because it was dismissive in the exact polished way powerful women always use when an omega becomes inconvenient in public. I'm your wife, I said. Vesper folded one arm over the other. Aurelia Thorne appeared from the board cluster at Aurelia's side before I could say more, as if she had been waiting for the cue. Lucienne was elegance stripped of mercy. Silver hair, winter eyes, a smile that made every sentence sound rehearsed. This is not the place for emotion, she said. I looked at her and felt something in me cool completely. No, I replied. It's the place for spectacle. That's why you arranged it here. Aurelia's jaw flexed. Lucienne turned to her daughter, and in that one glance, I understood that what was happening did not belong to the ballroom. It belonged to a decision made long before I arrived. Lucienne handed Aurelia a cream folder, legal paper. My stomach dropped before reason caught up. Aurelia held it as if it weighed more than it should. I was going to tell you after tonight, she said. My chest tightened so hard I almost lost breath. What is it? Her eyes locked on mine. Divorce papers. The orchestra kept playing. I remember that with horrible clarity. Some swelling classical piece carrying on above the moment my life split in two. The word entered me slowly. Divorce. It did not explode. It spread, like cold, like water under a locked door. I looked around the room. Women were looking away too carefully. Board members stood too still. Vesper did not look confused. I was the last person in the observatory to learn my marriage was already over. That was the real violence of it, not just rejection, publicly delayed knowledge. My own grief handed to me after the room had already prepared for the show. Aurelia held the folder out. Please don't make this harder. Something bright and deadly rose through me then. Not tears, clarity. What exactly do you think this is? Her fingers tightened on the file. It's finished, Iris. Finished. As if love were a meeting note. As if I had not shared her bed, her winters, her body, her silences. As if all of that could be edited down to a cleaner line for investors. I looked at the folder, at the women watching me, at Lucienne, at Vesper, at the cameras angled discreetly enough to deny malice. And I understood what they wanted. They wanted a scene, a breakdown, a pleading omega, something they could point to later and call proof that I had never belonged among them. So I smiled, a small, controlled smile. Aurelia saw it first and went pale. I held out my hand. Give me the papers. She hesitated, then obeyed. I read only enough to confirm what I already knew. Dissolution, mutual incompatibility, residence review, asset release. Mutual. That word nearly made me laugh. I had not been consulted. I had been scheduled. Where do I sign? I asked. Aurelia whispered. Iris. Where? Bottom page. I took the pen from her hand and signed in one clean line. No shaking, no tears, no public collapse. Just my name beneath the wreckage they had prepared for me. Then I closed the folder, returned it to Aurelia, and said softly, I hope she's worth what this costs you. For the first time that night, I saw fear in her eyes, because Aurelia knew something the others did not. She knew I listened when powerful women talked over me. She knew I noticed numbers. I knew which investors hated scandal, which board factions were starving for a reason to move, which councilwomen were pretending the company's debt exposure did not exist. She knew humiliating me in public would not bury me cleanly. It would create a witness. Vesper's smile vanished. Lucienne's expression sharpened. Aurelia looked as if I had struck her. Good. I looked at Vesper and said, Enjoy the seat. I hope it doesn't collapse under you. Then I turned and walked away while every eye in the room followed me. No one stopped me. Not Aurelia, not her mother, not security. No one. Outside, the winter air hit my face like truth. I took off my heels, held them in one hand, and walked barefoot down the observatory steps, because pain felt simpler than pride. Aurelia called once from behind me. I did not turn. That was the last thing I gave her for free. I did not go to the penthouse. I did not go to my friends. I went to the one place that had belonged to me before I was anyone's wife. My aunt's old bookbindery in the River District. She had died 2 years earlier, and left it to me in a will I had never been emotionally ready to read without crying. The storefront had been closed for months. Dust covered the windows. The sign hung crooked. Inside, the air smelled like glue, paper, and old ink. I still had the key. I locked myself in, sat on the floor between stacks of unsold journals, and cried until dawn because I was finally alone enough to do it. My phone vibrated all night. Aurelia. Again, again, again. Then her assistant. Then unknown board members. Then Lucienne, which would have been funny if I had not felt flayed. At sunrise, I turned the phone off. By noon, the city had turned my divorce into content. Every feed ran versions of the same headline. Thorne chairwoman splits from Omega wife. A few nastier channels called me discarded. A few kinder ones called me blindsided. Most of them replayed the footage of me taking the folder with that little controlled smile. The city loves a calm woman, most when it senses she is moments away from breaking. I spent the first day in grief, the second in numbness. By the third, I was angry enough to think clearly. That was when I called Junia Hale. Junia had been my closest friend since university, a beta with a practical mouth, a ruthless work ethic, and the moral flexibility of someone who only bends rules for women she loves. She arrived carrying coffee, a toolkit, and the exact expression of someone already planning collateral damage. The moment she saw my face, she set everything down and held me without speaking. When I finished telling her what happened, she leaned back and said, "Tell me you keyed her car." I signed the papers in front of the board. Junia stared, then let out a low, reverent whistle. "Oh, that's colder." I should have laughed. Instead, I crossed to my bag and took out the small black drive I had hidden there the night of the gala. Junia's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" "The reason I didn't beg." 3 weeks before the divorce, I had found a hidden compartment in Aurelia's private study behind a shelf of legal histories. I had not gone looking for war. I had gone looking for answers. Aurelia had become too strange, too quiet, too careful. Her meetings were off calendar. Her secure calls happened after midnight. She changed the study code and thought I did not notice I had memorized the pattern from the reflection in the glass. Inside the hidden safe were 4 drives and 1 cream folder. I took 1 drive because fear makes thieves of women who have run out of invitations. I replaced everything else exactly as I found it. Then I sat in the library with my pulse kicking against my ribs and opened the files. Every marriage has a moment when the future changes shape. Mine happened in silence with a black drive warming in my palm. Masked debt exposure through shell companies. Suppressed reporting on Omega certification fraud in labor branches. Draft language for strategic leadership stabilization. And then the file that made my body go cold. A succession memorandum laying out the exact rehabilitation strategy that would follow Aurelia's divorce from me and her public alignment with Vesper Arden. My name appeared throughout, never as a woman, as a liability, a narrative concern, a visibility problem, a timing variable. At the bottom of one appendix was the sentence I have never forgotten. Recommended sequence: preserve public alpha composure, execute dissolution with controlled optics, transition replacement within quarter. Recommended sequence, as if the end of my marriage were a furniture plan. Junia read the file tree in silence for a long time. Then she looked up and asked, "Do you want money or ruin?" I thought of the observatory, the hand on Vesper's back, the cream folder, the audience. Then I thought of the safe, the memorandum, and the women who had already decided what kind of ending an Omega deserved. I want the room they humiliated me in to become the room they lose everything. Junia smiled like a woman who had finally been given the correct assignment. That night she called Maeve Sloan. Maeve was an Omega rights litigator with a voice so calm it made corrupt women talk too much. She arrived in charcoal, took one look at the files and said, "This isn't a divorce problem, it's a systems problem." Then she looked up. "Which means it can become a public problem." We moved me that same night, not because I was in danger from Aurelia personally. I knew her well enough to know she would never send security after me. The danger was the family, the board, the women who could turn a narrative into a cage if I stayed still long enough. Junia had a studio loft in the freight ward above an old print supplier. It smelled like metal and rain and nothing remotely Thorne. Perfect. For 2 weeks we worked. Maeve built the legal frame. Junia built the media channels. I built the proof. I contacted former employees who had been pushed out after filing Omega health complaints. I found a logistics analyst willing to confirm the shell transfers. I met 2 ex-board assistants who had kept copies of meeting notes, because women at that level only stop underestimating support staff after it is too late. Every story fed the same shape. The divorce was not a private ending. It was a corporate operation. Aurelia had not chosen Vesper out of love. That would have hurt less. She had chosen compliance. The board wanted a public correction, a cleaner alpha image, a stronger council alignment. I was the variable they cut out of the picture. That was the wound that changed me. Not that Aurelia had stopped loving me, that she had decided love was less important than control. She found a way to contact me in the third week. Not directly. She used an encrypted relay attached to an old foundation channel I had once managed for her. The message was only 3 words. Are you safe? Hunya, who was editing deposition clips across the room, looked up when she heard me exhale. Who? I turned the screen. Her face hardened. Delete it. I should have. Instead, I typed, Did it matter at the gala? The answer came instantly. Yes. I stared at that single word until it blurred. Then I wrote, Then why did you do it? The response took longer. When it came, it was exactly the kind of answer I had grown to hate. Not here. I laughed. Even now, even after the observatory, she still wanted the room controlled before the truth entered it. I blocked the channel. Then I cried in the loft bathroom for 10 full minutes. Because love is humiliating long after a woman deserves it. The first strike landed in the trade press. Anonymous disclosures about masked debt exposure in Thorne Dominion's shipping arm. No names, just numbers. Enough to trigger questions. Stock dipped. The second strike arrived 48 hours later. A labor dossier on Omega Health certification fraud in subsidiary facilities. That one hit regulators and public feeds at the same time. Stock dipped harder. The board began to panic. Calls came from private numbers, a council mediator, a Thorne attorney, Vesper Arden herself. I answered only that last one. Her voice arrived smooth as velvet and twice as false. Iris, you sound disappointed I'm alive. A pause, then a soft laugh. This can still be handled quietly. I looked out over the freight yard lights and said, Quiet ended when your hand was waiting to take my place before my marriage was cold. She let the silence work for a second. Then she said, You were never built for Aurelia's world. There it was, pack-bred contempt underneath expensive diction. I almost thanked her for making my anger clean again. She never loved you, I said. Vesper's breathing changed, tiny but real. This isn't about love. I know, I replied. That's why you'll lose. Then I hung up. 1 week later, the company announced an emergency shareholder gala, public confidence event, stability showcase, council attendance mandatory. Vesper scheduled beside Aurelia in every preview image. The city was being told a new story before the old one had stopped bleeding. Fine. If they wanted a stage, I would use it better. Hunya spread 3 dresses across the loft bed. Maeve reviewed injunction packets in case security tried something stupid. I stood at the window while freight lights blinked below and watched my reflection become someone harder than the woman who walked barefoot away from the observatory. Red, I said. Hunya looked up. Oh, thank God. I was going to fight you if you picked black. The shareholder gala was held in Dominion Exchange Hall, a temple built from dark stone, gold light, and obscene acoustics. I arrived in crimson silk. Not elegant soft crimson, war crimson. High throat, bare shoulders, clean lines, no apology anywhere on the body. My hair was pinned up. My mouth was painted dark. At my wrist, I wore the only thing from Aurelia I had kept. A thin black diamond bracelet she once fastened for me, with reverent hands. Hunya came as media. Maeve came as counsel. The drive came in a silver clutch that fit my palm like intent. When I stepped out of the car, cameras burst like weather. Good. Let them film. Inside, the hall glittered with money and dread. The first women to see me tried not to show it. The second group failed. By the time I reached the main aisle, half the room had already turned. At the far end, near the stage, Aurelia looked up. She forgot to breathe. I knew her too well not to see it. Her entire body went still in the way it only did when she was hit by something she could not instantly control. Not fear for the company, Not fear for the board. Something more personal, and therefore far more dangerous. Vesper saw me next and stiffened. Lucienne's face went flat. That was enough to warm me. I walked down the center of the room without hurrying. No one touched me. No one dared. Maeve kept pace 2 steps behind. Hunia moved left with her camera already raised. I stopped beneath the Dominion crest and turned to face the hall. "Good evening," I said. No microphone. Didn't need one. The room was already listening. Lucienne rose first. Of course she did. "This event is private," Maeve answered before I had to. "My client is a materially impacted party in an active regulatory matter tied to this board and its public disclosures. She is entitled to stand wherever the truth reaches." The room shifted. Aurelia had still not moved. She was watching me the way she used to watch storms through glass, aware that beauty and damage were about to arrive together. I stepped onto the stage. Security twitched. Maeve held up a court notice. 3 regulators in the hall turned at once. Security stopped. Then I looked at the women who had expected me to vanish. 4 weeks ago, I said. My divorce was staged in public so this company could continue selling female alpha stability while hiding rot under the floorboards. No one interrupted. Good. Some of you watched. Some of you knew. Some of you drafted the story that followed. My gaze skimmed the board table. Precise, unhurried. I was supposed to leave quietly, take the humiliation, take the settlement, become an example of what happens when an Omega mistakes proximity for belonging. The hall went silent enough to hear the climate system. I lifted the silver clutch. Unfortunately for all of you, I read before I signed. Then I connected the drive to the presentation port built into the podium. The first file hit the rear screens before anyone physically understood what I had done. Debt transfers, massed liabilities, shell structures, then labor certifications, then the succession memorandum. My name, the divorce timeline, the Vesper repositioning strategy, the narrative recovery plan. The room broke open. Investors stood. Councilwomen started speaking over one another. 2 regulators moved immediately toward the board table. Vesper lunged for the console. Hunia was faster. She had already overridden the visual lock with a media relay. The screens stayed live. Lucienne started issuing orders. Maeve started smiling. Aurelia started walking toward the stage. She stopped at the base, not close enough to touch me. Good. Let distance finally do what it should have done before. "Iris," she said. Her voice was rougher than I remembered. "Please step down." That almost made me pity her. Almost. "So you can manage this in private?" I asked. Pain flashed across her face. There. Real. Visible. Deserved. Vesper grabbed a microphone from one of the hosts. "These materials are stolen and incomplete. This is a personal vendetta." I took the microphone from her hand before she finished the sentence. She lost balance for half a second. Petty satisfaction is still satisfaction. "Personal vendetta?" I repeated. "Yes, Vesper. Being divorced under chandeliers while my replacement waited in frame did, in fact, make me personal." Laughter burst from the press line. Sharp, merciless. Vesper's expression cracked. I turned back to the room. "This is not about my marriage ending. It's about a company that uses Omega bodies, Omega labor, and Omega reputations as stabilizers whenever powerful women get frightened." Now the regulators were on phones. One investor was already demanding a board freeze. Lucienne looked like she had swallowed acid. Aurelia looked only at me. No anger, no attempt to silence me. Just grief and the brutal recognition that I had become the exact woman she should have trusted from the start. By midnight, trading was suspended. By morning, 2 Thorne divisions were under emergency review. By afternoon, Vesper's family had issued a distancing statement so fast it was practically smoke. And Aurelia sent a handwritten request to meet. I refused the first one. I refused the second, too. The third arrived folded once, no seal, no assistant, no company crest. I opened it because part of me still hated itself. Iris, you deserve never to see me again. I know that. But there are truths not in the files, and if you hear them elsewhere, you will believe the worst version of me. Maybe you should. Still, if you want the whole of it, meet me Thursday at 10 at the North Winter Garden. No security, only me. Ahunia wanted me to burn it. Maeve wanted to wire me for sound and bring 6 witnesses. I wanted not to care. Instead, I went. The North Winter Garden was where Aurelia kissed me for the first time. Glass roof, river cliffs below, white orchids in winter, the kind of place powerful women use for either charity or ruin. Aurelia stood alone when I arrived. No driver, no guard, no insignia. Just a dark coat and a face that looked older than it had a month ago. I stopped 10 feet away. You have 5 minutes. She nodded once. Then she did something I had never seen her do. She looked uncertain. The board moved against me in January, she said. No greeting. Very Aurelia. They had the succession replacement drafted before the observatory. I know. Her eyes lifted. Then you know they threatened to strip my voting authority, executive control, and line rights if I did not dissolve the bond. That part had not been in the files. I went still. And you chose them. The pain on her face was immediate. You think I don't know that? Then explain, Vesper. Aurelia looked toward the glass, dark. Vesper offered cover. The board wanted a visible alpha replacement they could sell to investors and councilwomen. I let them believe she had me. I laughed without joy. That's not better. No, she said. It's just true. The wind moved through the orchids. She continued. I thought I could sign the divorce, stabilize the board, dismantle the agreement from inside, and come back for you when it was safe. The sheer arrogance of that logic almost took my breath. Not because it sounded impossible, because it sounded exactly like her. Cut now, repair later. Call survival love. You came back for me, I repeated. She looked at me as if the words themselves were a punishment. I went to the penthouse after the observatory. You were gone. You expected me to wait? No, she said at once. I hoped. That one hurt. It hurt because I believed her. I hated believing her. That's the difference between us, I said. You always hoped I would survive whatever you did to me. Her voice dropped. Yes. There it was. No defense. No elegant spin. Just the ugliest truth in the room. I looked at the woman I had loved and saw all the terrible symmetry of it. She had not betrayed me because she felt nothing. She had betrayed me because she believed she had the right to choose suffering on my behalf. That was worse. You should have chosen me in public, I said. She closed her eyes briefly. I know. You should have trusted me with the truth. I know. You should have let them strip you before you let them strip me. Her face emptied. No argument, no retreat. Only, I know. Then she reached into her coat and took out a slim document folder. I tensed. She stopped immediately and set it on the bench between us instead of offering it directly. My resignation, she said. From executive chair, from family succession, from all PAC-held claims tied to the board arrangement. I stared at her. What? The regulators would have forced part of it. The rest is mine to surrender. She looked at me with a steadiness that felt more honest than anything she had offered me in months. You said I chose power over you. I did. I will not do it twice. I wish I could say that healed something. It didn't. It only clarified the tragedy. She was offering me the thing I had needed before she broke us. Too late for salvation. Not too late for truth. I looked at the folder, then at her. I didn't come here for your redemption. I know. Good. A faint, sad smile touched her mouth. I didn't bring one. For a moment, all I could hear was the river and the glass settling in the cold. Then I said, I came to see if I could still walk away. Her eyes changed. No defense, only acceptance. Can you? I thought of the observatory, the folder in my hand, the room waiting for me to break. Then I thought of the bindery, the women at the legal desk, Hunia laughing over ruined boots, Maeve annotating predatory bond clauses in red pen. I thought of the life that had grown only after my marriage ended. Yes, I said. Aurelia nodded, not gracefully, like the motion hurt. Then she stepped back. I won't ask for forgiveness. Good. I won't ask for another chance. Better. That time the smile on her face was real, small, and devastating. There's the woman I fell in love with. I should have softened. Instead, I answered with the cleanest truth I had. You didn't fall in love with this woman. You helped make her. Aurelia inhaled sharply. Then she said, Yes. I took the resignation folder because I wanted proof that even women like Aurelia Thorne could finally understand the cost of control. Then I left first. She did not follow. The next morning, her resignation went public. The city lost its mind. Lucienne Thorne called it self-destruction. Vesper called it emotional compromise. The board called it instability. The press called it historic. I called it late. Still, late truth is better than an elegant lie. The court hearing came 6 weeks later. Smaller room, no chandeliers, no orchestra to hide behind, just law and consequence. Maeve presented the coercive dissolution case, the reputational harm, the public humiliation strategy, and the labor suppression fraud chain. I gave testimony without theatrics, not the dramatic truth, the plain one, how I learned, how I was staged, how my existence had been discussed as a liability, how Aurelia had known the harm and chosen execution over trust. Then Aurelia stood to testify. I expected caution. What I got was confession. She did not defend the observatory. She did not defend the board. She did not defend the fantasy that hurting me had protected me. When asked whether she had alternatives, she said, yes. When asked why she had not taken them, she looked at me once and said, cowardice dressed as strategy. The ruling came 3 days later. The dissolution stood. So did the damages, public censure, personal compensation from Aurelia, mandatory oversight into Omega labor certification across the remaining Thorne divisions. Everything Maeve wanted. Everything I needed. And then something surprising happened. Life got better. Not prettier. Not easier in one miraculous sweep. Better. I used the settlement to reopen my aunt's bindery properly. Hunya helped me gut the back storage and turn it into a print studio. Maeve helped me add a legal resource corner for Omegas, navigating contracts, dismissals, housing, and bond coercion. We renamed the place Vane and Open. Junya said it sounded like a warning and a welcome at the same time. Perfect. Women started coming. Quietly at first, then steadily. An Omega florist with a hidden debt clause in her bond. A beta mother fighting a pack-biased custody order. A young female alpha who wanted to draft a non-coercive partnership agreement because she had watched her own mother destroy 3 lives with 1 sentence. I built shelves. I built desks. I built a room women could enter without shrinking. That became the real comeback. Not the gala, not the headlines, not even the court. This. Creation after removal. Meaning after humiliation. A life that was mine before it was admired. 3 months after the hearing, Aurelia came to the shop. Not with flowers, not with security, not with an apology rehearsed into something polished. She arrived alone at closing, in a dark coat with winter in her hair, and stopped just inside the doorway, as if she understood thresholds now. "What do you want?" I asked. She looked around the shop first, at the shelves, the reading lamps, the little brass sign above the legal desk. When she looked back at me, her face was stripped of everything except honesty. "To see what your comeback looked like." That answer disarmed me more than begging would have. "And?" "It looks like a life I should never have interrupted." I said nothing. She reached into her coat. I went cold. She saw it immediately and stopped, then set an envelope on the counter instead of handing it to me. Not legal strategy. Not a plea. The deed to the vacant warehouse next door, signed over to the shop, clean, irrevocable, no conditions. "You'll need the space," she said. "You can't buy absolution." "No," she answered quickly. "I know." "Then why?" "Because for the first time in my life, I know how to give something without building a lock into it." That line almost undid me. Not because it won me back, because it told me she had finally learned what I had wanted her to understand before she destroyed us. I took the deed. Not her hand, not her name. The deed. Nothing more. "I'm not coming back," I said. "I know," she replied. "I mean ever." Her eyes brightened, but she held steady. "I know." Then, after a pause, she said, "I'm not here to reopen what I closed. I'm here to leave one useful thing behind and go." That was the moment I stopped hating the woman in front of me. Not because she deserved restoration, because she finally understood the shape of accountability. "I did love you," I said. Her whole face changed. Not hope, just grief wrapped around gratitude. "I know." "And I did beg," I added. "Just not where you could hear it." That landed. Hard. Good. Let truth bruise cleanly. Aurelia lowered her gaze. When she looked up again, she seemed younger somehow. Not innocent, just unarmored. I know that now, too. I leaned against the counter. In another life, maybe you would have chosen me before the room. Her voice was barely above a whisper. In another life, I would have deserved the chance. There was nothing left to say after that. No kiss, no second chance, no part two waiting in the shadows. Just an ending that finally fit the damage. Aurelia stepped back. I won't come again unless you ask. You won't need to. She nodded once, then she left. This time she did not look back. This time, she knew better. After she was gone, I locked the door myself. Not because I was afraid, because choosing what closes is part of freedom too. We opened the warehouse 2 months later. More shelves, more presses, more legal desks. A small upstairs room for emergency stays when women needed one safe night before deciding what came after. Hunya hung the new sign crooked on purpose and called it character. Maeve rolled her eyes and fixed it. I laughed so hard I had to sit down on a box of paper stock. That was the first moment I understood, fully and without reservation, that I was happy. Not almost happy, not surviving with style. Happy. My work mattered. My home was mine. My name no longer arrived with someone else's attached to it. One spring morning, a year after the observatory, we held a free contract clinic in the warehouse. The upstairs room was ready. The reading tables were full. Women came with folders, children, questions, and cautious hope. At noon, Hunya set down a tray of tea and leaned over to murmur, "You know this is the kind of ending that would have made them furious." I looked around the room, at the Omegas comparing notes, at Maeve explaining a predatory clause to a nervous young alpha with more patience than she admitted having, at the sunlight on the floorboards, at the life that existed because I had not begged. And I smiled. Good, I said. That afternoon, I went upstairs alone and opened the top drawer of the old desk we kept in the library. Inside was the original copy of my divorce order. I kept it there on purpose. Not as a wound, as a marker. The moment one life ended and another finally had room to begin. I folded it once more, set it back in the drawer, and closed it. Then I locked the drawer. Then I put the key in my own pocket. That was the final image of my marriage. Not Aurelia at the observatory. Not the folder under chandeliers. Not even the court. A closed drawer and a key in my hand. The city did what cities always do. It moved on. Lucienne lost her board majority. Vesper married a financier in the north and vanished into a smaller circle of women who confused pedigree with relevance. Aurelia left corporate life entirely and took over a coastal restoration foundation that rebuilt flood-damaged neighborhoods and paid Omega workers properly under independent oversight. I heard it through public reports. I did not write to congratulate her. I did not need to. Some endings do not require contact to become complete. Mine was complete the day I realized I no longer measured my worth against being chosen. That was the trick all along. The women at the observatory thought my humiliation would come from losing my alpha. They misunderstood the scale of me. I was never humiliated by being left. I was humiliated by how long I mistook being kept for being valued. Once I learned the difference, there was no putting me back where they wanted me. That is why this story ends here. Not with a door reopening. Not with a late reunion. Not with the fantasy that the woman who hurt me only needed more time to become safe for me. No. It ends with a business, a legal desk, a warehouse full of women who now know how to read every clause before they sign. It ends with laughter in the next room and tea going cold on my desk because I'm too busy living to drink it on time. It ends with peace that does not have to ask permission from love. Aurelia thought I would beg after the divorce. Instead, I built a life so full, so useful, and so happy that even regret had nowhere left to sit. And that was not just my comeback. It was my happy ending.